So you got a sense the rest of the morning how Bitcoin, blockchain, how some of that disruption will take place. For how many of you was it new to hear about Bitcoin to that level of detail? Can I just see a show of hands? Okay, excellent. So a lot of you had a good familiarity with it. Very nice. I'm going to talk a little bit about the book. I want to really focus more, though, on what do you do as an existing organization? How do you adapt to this pace of change? Just to calibrate, how many of you are familiar with the book and the contents and the model, the EXO model? Show of hands. Okay, so what I'm going to do is rapidly run through that to calibrate everybody and then really focus on the where do we go with this. I mentioned earlier a little bit about my background. I spent several years in Europe, as I said, restructuring large European companies, mostly French ones. And for a couple of years before Singularity, I was the head of innovation at Yahoo running their incubator. And I found that when you try and do disruptive innovation in any large organization, the immune system will come and attack you. Right? All of our organizations are built to resist change and withstand change, and how do we deal with that? And so this is essentially the heart of it. Not just our organizations, but our institutions. We tend to look at the world in kind of three layers. Traditionally, all of our kind of economy has been driven by very physicalized products. You took raw materials, you transform them, you ship them around. Then we have kind of a layer where the product may be physical, like your Kindle or your iPhone, but all the revenue streams are information-based and digital. The subscription model, the songs, etc. And now with the rise of the internet, we're seeing this purely digital model where everything is information-based and there's no physicality left to it in that sense. You've seen this in the financial services world. We used to physically move money around, and now you just move information around, right? And we've seen that transition take place. The world used to look very predominantly pyramidic in the one way, but now it's obviously switching around in another, and you can see that as the heart of this. And this, of course, has all of the effects of digitization, disruption, as I mentioned, with the camera analogy. But we talked a little bit this morning about the huge deflationary aspect that takes place in this. There's two things happening at the economic side, and Amin will talk a little bit further about the future of this, but the volatility of the environment is accelerating. It used to take 20 years to create a billion-dollar marketplace. We're now seeing that happen in months. But this is the curve that I find most interesting. In the newspaper business, revenues kind of trundle along, and then boom, a 6x drop in revenues. There's kind of huge deflationary cliff that takes place whenever we see an information-enabled industry that goes end-to-end digitized. In the music business, we're saying the same thing. You can see the same cliff take place, a 10x drop in revenues in that industry. Note that it's called a media business. They're trying to sell the physical media. Actually, it's an information service. Once you can go from artist to listener with a YouTube video, all of the intermediaries disappear. Many of you are aware of the fact that this curve and this cliff is hitting the TV business in the US right now. Media buying is catching up to the reality that very few people are watching ads. Younger generation isn't even watching TV at all. Right? And as we've kind of talked about endlessly over this couple of days, we're very bad at spotting this pace of change. All of our education and training and intuition teaches us linear extrapolation. I want to give you some sense of how bad it is. When the Google car first came out, it used to cost a ton of money. The first cars were like hundreds of thousands of dollars for all of the sensors, et cetera, et cetera. And all the experts, all the car experts said, well, you're never going to commercialize that. It's a cute research project. Go for it, but it'll never happen. Then a couple of years later, it was $80,000 a car. And now we're down to less than $1,000 a car for those sensors. Right now, everybody's freaking out. 10 years ago, we had maybe 500 million internet-connected devices. We're up today to about 12 billion. This prediction from Ericsson was that we'd be at 50 billion by the end of the decade. I was talking to Ericsson a couple of months ago, and they said we were wrong about this prediction. Our new prediction is 500 billion by the end of the decade. And something we see consistently in these domains is when an expert in a domain that's exponentially growing makes a prediction, they're off by about 10x. Okay, so this is not a math error, this is a cognitive error. Car companies, internet companies, et cetera, et cetera. Ramez may have shown you this graph of solar energy and the way it's dropping off a cliff. In 2003, the leading expert in solar in the world said this. He said, look, the cost of the physical wiring and the glass and the composites, you will never drop below $1 a watt. That's the floor. That's as cheap as solar energy will ever get. You can see the market actually believed him for a little bit. Then the cost started dropping, kept dropping. We just dropped below 30 cents a watt, as you may have heard from Ramez. And his latest comment is here at the bottom. He said, okay, getting below $1 has exceeded my expectations, right? And we're fond of saying this. We're fond of seeing this and kind of the volatility of expertise, the half-life of shrinking very, very dramatically. Now we're information enabling everything. Anywhere where we have episodic use of an asset, it's turning from a product to a service, right? And when transportation turns to a service, we'll see the end of car insurance, for example, because you won't own a car. Nobody in Silicon Valley today buys a second car. And so very dramatic things there. And the kind of underlying dynamic that makes this inexorable is that all of these technologies are going through this curve where the domain goes digital, the costs go to zero, open source communities form, and then you see radical disruption of the status quo. And whether it's drones or Bitcoin or neuroscience or 3D printing, all of them are going through this kind of a pattern. I would put Bitcoin and blockchain about there. The technologies have now converged. We're about to see an explosion of new products and services come out. The key to thinking about this is when a technology or a set of products or services become usable, then the usability, it takes off. Steve Jobs made the iPhone usable, right? If you saw the Baxter robot with Rob yesterday, robotics is now usable. You don't have to spend millions of instructions to program prescriptively the robot. It adaptively learns. And so now we'll see this. So when a technology becomes usable, that's when you're sure to see inflection points. I don't know if we talked about Soylent. Have we talked about Soylent? So we talked about healthcare becoming digital, energy is becoming digital, transportation is becoming digital. This is Rob Reinhardt, software developer here in New York City. Got annoyed that he had to stop writing code to go eat lunch. And so he looked around and said, why can't I drink one of these shakes that gives me a whole meal, then I don't have to go out for lunch and break my concentration? Turns out it didn't exist. Spent 4 months with nutritionists and biochemists and came up with Soylent. You drink this, it's 100% of the carbs, nutrients, fats, minerals, vitamins you need. You can drink this and not take in anything else. People have now lived on this for 6 months without taking anything else in. They've lost a ton of weight. They're way healthier. They're getting the exact complement of what they need. Right? They're bored out of their minds, of course. Right? Like, you drink this for 6 months, you're going bananas with boredom. Okay? Two interesting things about this, though. First is, if you were kind of our age and you were kind of coming from a traditional mindset, 35 years or older, your initial instinct would be to patent that recipe and license it out as a business model. Right? Wrap some intellectual property around it. It's a cool invention, etc. This younger generation is different. He open sourced his recipe. Anybody can go make this. In fact, there's more than 2,000 variants of the original recipe already. And when asked why, he said, look, I've got a massive purpose. I want to solve hunger. If there's an earthquake in Ecuador, I want people to be able to drop boxes of this stuff in without needing me. So they said, how will you make money? He said, I'm going to iterate my software, my recipe, faster than anybody else. I'll always have the best recipe. There's release 1.4. Food is now software. He's iterating his recipe the way we iterate software. Okay? By the way, version 1.3 had a bug in it. It caused gas. So if you see that on sale for cheap, you want to stay away from it, right? But think about that. How bizarre is that? Food now becomes amenable and manipulable by software. Okay, so every domain that we think of as a traditional environment is kind of dissolving in front of our eyes. And all driven by this pace of change, as we know, which is not slowing down. So what do we do with this? How do we deal with this? In our businesses, in all our environments, we're seeing this kind of radical change where every aspect of the business lifecycle is turning into a digital model. The sales and marketing are now completely digital. There's no analog component left to it. Chris Anderson wrote this book called Free, and he argued that every business model, if it becomes information enabled, goes to free. And then you make money off a freemium model, cross subsidies, advertising, et cetera, et cetera. 10 years ago when he wrote this, people said, you're crazy, that's not possible. We're finding more and more that it's true. Right? One of my favorite examples is Ryanair. If you fly around in Europe, the low-cost airline, if you buy the ticket early enough, it's like €5 to cross the whole of Europe. You pay as you get closer to the date, so there's a time value there. You pay not to sit in the middle seat. You pay for every suitcase, and then as soon as he puts the sensor, you'll pay for every oxygen molecule you consume on the plane. Right? It's going to happen. The CEO is actually quite a character. He applied to the European Union and said, I'd like to give all my tickets away completely for free. Please let me do gambling in the seatback monitors. Because he worked out he made more money with 2 hours of somebody gambling than the profit margin on the average ticket, right? And so you can see where it's going. The EU, of course, said no. My first instinct was, okay, because the EU, of course, they said no. But it turned out they had a valid reason. I was talking to one of the regulators. They said you'd have a huge encouragement and an incentive for having plane delays. You could see the pilots being ordered to circle around and saying, please keep gambling, we can't land, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't want to encourage that behavior, right? But you can see the general trend there. Kevin Kelly wrote a rebuttal to this book called Better Than Free. And anything written by Kevin is worth reading, but this is particularly interesting. He identifies 8 ways of adding value if the base information is widely available. And this is essentially the business models of a digital age. And you can recognize a lot of those in the financial services world, which has operated in this world for a while. But this is the quote that really got me. David Rose on this stage a couple of years ago said, hey, if you think about how we build our organizations, all our organizations are built for scalability and what John Hagel from Deloitte will call scalable efficiency, right? They're built for predictability. They're not built for flexibility, adaptability, or disruption. Every MBA program in the world today teaches you how to build a 20th century company. There's no MBA program in the world that teaches you how to build Uber, right? So every MBA program is out of date. And so very fascinating to see. The basis around the book is we've learned how to scale technology. How do you scale the actual org structure? TED is a great example. Nice high-end conference, about 1,000 people a year. Chris Anderson takes it over. He does 3 things. Establishes a big purpose saying ideas worth spreading, let anybody create a TEDx event, and releases all the TED Talks for free. In 7 years, it's a global media brand. Right? Nobody's ever created a global media brand so fast, and its cost was pretty much 0. So there's the opportunity today to take a plateaued business, apply some techniques, and blow it open. And so we've been looking at that. We've now found about 100 organizations operating like this, where they're delivering a minimum 10x performance improvement compared to their peers in the same space. Local Motors is a great example. A normal car costs about $3 billion to design from scratch. Local Motors does it for $3 million. A typical car has 25,000 parts. A Local Motors car is about 50. The manufacturing space required for a car is typically 1 million square feet of factory space. A Local Motors car could be made on this stage. Right? How do you compete if you're a traditional car company when this is possible? Dematerialized, demonetized down to almost nothing. Fascinating to see there. There's 3 components that go into building an exponential organization. The first is they all have what I call a massive transformative purpose. Okay? Google, organize the world's information, etc. Singularity, go impact 1 billion people. What we're seeing over this last year is that brands are morphing into this. Open happiness has been the recent mantra of Coca-Cola, right? Their traditional mission statement would have been, sell more sugar water through highly leveraged distribution chains and add value to our ecosystem of vendors, suppliers, da-da-da-da-da. And nobody inside Coke would know what that was. If you have a traditional mission statement in your company, nobody in your organization can repeat it. But everybody inside Google knows organize the world's information. So it's a tagline with a social purpose wired into it. Paul Pullman, the global CEO of Unilever, has ordered every brand in Unilever to take on a massive transformative purpose. They're using this book as their operating Bible, which is starting to be increasingly mandatory in companies like Procter & Gamble and others. So we're kind of fascinated to see that. There's 5 externalities that these new organizations use along with a massive purpose, which is they keep a small footprint and they use one of these externalities to scale very rapidly. Uber doesn't own its own staff, TED uses community, Google uses algorithms, and so on. Then there's 5 internal mechanisms to manage the internal control framework, drive culture, and kind of do the operational side. Rapid iteration, the lean startup methodology, decentralized org structures, etc. We found that if you implement 4 out of the 10, you get the 10x performance improvement. Not everybody does all of them, but if you get 4 out of the 10, you get a 10x performance improvement. Okay? You can actually take a survey where you can actually score your own organization and see how flexible it is. Last year at this conference, we kind of went on CNBC and announced on Squawk Box a ranking of the Fortune 100 ranked by the flexibility of their org structure. Okay? And how rapidly could they adapt to the external world. You can kind of see the full list online. But the really key thing was that Hult Business Schools did a stock market analysis. Somebody want to take a picture of this? I'll let you guys take a picture. We have digitally available things, we have an abundance of digital copies, but okay. But really the interesting thing about this was the Hult Business Schools did an analysis, and they found that your exponential score, your flexibility, your org structure, correlates directly with how flexible and adaptable your organization is, and that correlates to your stock market performance, right? And so this was a great thing for us, because this means that every CEO in the world now has to pay attention to this. Right? And this makes sense. As the external world becomes more volatile, your ability to adapt will drive market performance. Okay? So, this is from the epilogue of the book. You can see the market cap increase just in the 10 quarters while I was writing the book of some of the top exponential organizations, seeing how fast they can actually scale their market cap. Our advice to large companies is maybe the most seminal part, and we spent about 40% of the book thinking about that. That's the high order question that we had. It's really great to have this model, and we can see lots of startups. What the hell do you do if you have an existing existing organization. We have two major pieces that I'll highlight. The first is you have to update your leadership that this is happening. If your C-suite and your board is not fundamentally aware, you're behind the 8 ball, right? You take an example like BMW, right? Their tagline is we're the ultimate driving machine. And we're pretty clear that nobody's going to be driving. So that's a pretty big tension to navigate in that sense, right? Now the C-suite gets it. They have to get the board aligned to give them permission to radically change the company, okay? And you saw the negative example of this with Blockbuster, where he tried to negotiate with Netflix, and the board said, don't do it. You're bigger than they are. But you cannot beat an exponential organization. And 2 years later, they were dead. This is a session, our Innovation Partners program that we do in partnership with Deloitte, where we get C-suite execs for 4 days. We asked them beforehand, how aware are you of these technologies? And you can see most had very, very little awareness. At the end of the 4 days, we said, how big of an impact will this have on your industries? 80% of them agreed that these technologies would have a game-changing impact on their industries within 2 years. Okay? 100% within 5 years. And so this is the gap. If their senior leadership is not fully aware of what's going on, you've got a huge problem. And it requires a very different type of leadership. Zuckerberg saw all of his Facebook users drifting to WhatsApp, and he spent 1/5 of his market cap on this startup with very little traction. A traditional CEO absolutely would not be able to do that. They would not be able to get that through their kind of board in order to do this, right? And this was the right decision to make, in a sense. So hugely different type of leadership. Our second big kind of recommendation is do not try and do a radical business transformation project on your existing organization. It's too difficult, it's too political, it takes way too long, it costs a ton of money, and 75% of these big business transformation projects fail. What you can do is take a small team to the edge and build one of these off the edge. Larry Page came to me a few years ago at one of our events and said, hey, your Brickhouse unit at Yahoo is really successful. Should I do that at Google? And I said, no, you'll have the same immune system response. Do something like it, keep it stealth, point it outwards. And you can see the result with Google X, where they take their core capability and they add hardware at the edges and kind of point away Google Glass, Google Car, et cetera, et cetera. The master of this is actually Apple. Apple has built a hyper-successful company. They do one thing that nobody else in the world does. Yeah, they have a great design team and a great technology supply chain, but I argue that their real innovation is actually organizational. What they do is they take a small team that's really disruptive, they take it to the edge of the organization, they basically keep them totally stealth, and they say, go disrupt another industry. Right? Nobody else does this. They started with music and then phones and then tablets and now what? Payments, cars, watches, healthcare. Literally no limit to their market cap. They can just keep knocking over industry after industry. And in a world where either you're the disruptor or you're the disrupted, we think other large organizations will have to follow suit. And so we're doing a lot of advisory work to large organizations as to how to deal with this. A key success criteria is becoming a platform. Okay, you look at the internet, Yahoo, BlackBerry, Nokia, all failed to become a platform. Yahoo now has joined the league of kind of the tech companies where people, like AOL, where people go, just die already, you know, just kind of give up the ghost and let it go, et cetera, et cetera. There's some really great war stories. I'll just highlight one of them here. Walmart, you know, 10 years ago, Walmart realized they had to compete with Amazon. So they had to, along with their physical retailing, they said, we have to have an e-commerce capability. So they created a team and said, go leverage our inventory, supply chain, distribution networks, et cetera, which are the best in the world. Within 18 months, the immune system had just killed it dead. So they said, all right, we're going to do it again. We'll do it at the edge. Okay? So they created a team off to the edge, but that still continue to use our existing supply chain because we have it. 18 months later, it was dead. Okay? They tried it a third time. They said, all right, keep it separate and have your separate supply chain inventory distribution mechanisms so we don't interfere from the mothership. Started to succeed. The business pulled it back in too early, killed it. And on the fourth iteration, okay, think of the careers and the opportunity cost and the cycle time, all of that. On the fourth iteration, they did it separately outside on the edge, and only after it achieved its own scale and its own critical mass did they start stitching the back ends together. And the lesson I take for that is this is just fundamentally hard. We've never had to learn this as a business community. There's no place you can learn how to do this. And so we have to kind of completely retrain a lot of our management thinking to deal with this. I'll just highlight one more. Amazon has a really fascinating policy where they found it's really easy in any big company to say no to an idea. Okay? So at Amazon, they have a policy called the institutional yes. If you come to me inside Amazon with an idea, my default answer has to be yes. If I want to say no, I have to write a 2-page thesis as to why it's a bad idea and post it publicly. So they've created friction and embarrassment to saying no, meaning that many ideas get tried and tested all the way through. Okay? Amazon Web Services was one of these. Nobody could say no to this thing. It had nothing to do with the core business. Now one of the most successful products of all time. Okay, so fascinating. The thing that I wanted to highlight and really announce today is the most interesting thing that we've done in the last year. Last year, one of the largest CPG companies in the world, their CIO came and said, hey, can we implement some of your thinking in our company? And I said, look, our normal thing is we go back and forth with our management. They come to Singularity, we come, you come. And it takes like 2.5 years to get all of your senior management up to date. Let's do a 10-week sprint and move your management thinking 2 years ahead in a 10-week period. And so we ran a 10-week sprint for them. And after a year later, all of the projects they launched actually saw working incredibly well. And I think we actually have solved the immune system problem in large companies. We just did a second one with a Mexican insurance company, a public company called Interprotección. The CEO just told me, this blew past my wildest expectations. And so we're really, really excited. We're starting to partner with companies to do this in their organizations because this pace of change is not actually slowing down, right? It's actually accelerating. And we have to radically change this. We see a really fundamental issue in large organizations today, especially public ones. And I'll just highlight that in a second, and then we'll go to some Q&A because I want to leave some time for questions. I've probably spoken to about 500 C-suite execs from Fortune 1000 companies over the last couple of years in the course of the book, et cetera. About 80% of them are operating in a denial mode where they don't know this technology is coming, or if they do, they don't think it affects their industry. Right? So 60 out of the 80, 60% have no idea, 20% have some idea, but they go, not our industry. You know, we're special. Right? The 20% that do realize it kind of go, holy crap, this is happening. 15 out of the 20 do nothing. Because they go, my stock option package is my pay period is, my contract is 2 years left in it. I'm not changing a thing. I have no interest, I have no commercial interest in actually doing this. I have every interest in keeping the status quo. And then they hand it off to their successor who gets landed with this thing, which is now falling off a cliff. And so we think there's like 5% of big companies that are actually thinking in the right way. So this is going to be quite a kind of a bloodbath as we kind of go into this new model and think about how this will work. So let me pause there. We're running this. Any questions around this? Because we've covered a few different areas in this talk. But let's pause there and see if there's any questions. Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, the reason is that all of our organizations are, why does not the immune system response come out, right? What does it kill innovation? The reason is that a number of things. All our organizations are built and architected to do the same thing repeatedly and do that rapidly at a globalized way to deliver the same widget in 100 countries with back-end ERP systems, et cetera. If you say we're going to do something in a totally different way, it basically says we don't do that here, not for us. It's really hard to navigate disruptive change. I'll tell you a quick story that I think brings this home for me. At Yahoo, I kind of got 5 promises from Jerry Yang and the senior management before we started the incubator. I wanted to be off-site. I wanted to be able to go off-brand. I wanted to be able to give equity in the idea to the guys that had the idea, et cetera. I didn't have to operate in the technology stack, and I wanted to be free of legal and HR hassles. That was the 5 promises. And they said, yep, thumbprint with blood. We agree with all these done. Day 2, we're looking at our new empty office space in San Francisco, and I'm looking with my developers as to what do we do with this. And a furniture truck rolls up. And a guy's there with cubicles and couches, et cetera. And he goes, I'm here. We said, what's this? And he said, I'm here to deliver the furniture. And we said, no. We have sign off. We don't need this, et cetera. He goes, you don't understand. My bonus depends on me delivering furniture within 48 hours of an office opening. I'm coming in. Get out of the way. And all of a sudden, and my developers looked at this and said, what the hell? We came here to work kind of in an open environment. We'll come back when the furniture's gone. And on day 2, I'm in Dilbert land, and all my developers are gone. And it wasn't like he was being a bad guy, right? He was just trying to do his job. But all of the processes and so on are architected and calcified to doing the same thing again and again. It can't handle when you do something disruptive. And so you have to create a completely separate organization. How many of you have tried disruptive innovation inside your organizations? Okay, show of hands. And how many have succeeded? Right, 1. Okay? And that's about the right number, okay? And you probably got lucky, or no, I'm just kidding. I'm sure you. So, but it's just incredibly hard. We just don't know how to do this. So this is a fundamental new world that we're operating in. And this also applies to our governments and institutions, right? They were out of date pretty desperately at those levels as well. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So we hear about the gig economy and basically employees no longer becoming employees. How would this impact future organizations?
Well, it's kind of starting to happen already. My co-author, Mike Malone, wrote this book in the 80s called The Virtual Corporation. Basically, you don't even know where the boundaries are of your organization, right? You've got so many contract workers, home working, et cetera, et cetera. And so that all we are doing is taking it to another level out. The key thing is not to hire, because then you don't have the hassle of having a huge workforce. You use an Uber type of approach. What we now need to do is figure out what does the social contract look like between a government and those types of workers and the companies, so that they have pension plans, healthcare, insurance, commercial protection, et cetera, liability insurance, and so on. That's the big question now, and we're actually starting a project to think about that. We'd like to get together 20 labor secretaries around the world and say, how are we going to navigate this, and have some open discussion around that. One of the big issues we have across all of this is all public policy is determined defensively and reactively, right? And we need to figure out how to get in front of that in many of these areas to do things in a very different way. But it's a very difficult conversation, and we're going to see a massive transition. But there's incredible labor liquidity that comes from this, and we're seeing a huge explosion in mothers who can drop off kids, and then they go drive for Uber for a bit and come back, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Time for one last question. Marcus is about to kick me off stage. One last question. Yes, sir. Yeah. Alignment with?
Priorities, goals.
To the mothership?
People are laughing.
If you do that, my thesis would be that you won't get disruptive innovation, you'll get incremental innovation if you try and align. And it'll be subconscious, right? It won't even be conscious, and so that's a very radical change. I can see myself being about to be tackled from the back. It's two against one. So with that, let's pause. I'll kind of try and moderate us to a decent level of time. Thank you very much for doing that.